Catching up with Keith. Catching up with Keith. Take a look. I bet he wrote another book in the time that it took to sing the silly song called Catching Up with Keith. Boom, 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 boom. The weird thing is he did write another book in the time that it took.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. This is Not Church. I'm Nat Turney. With me, as always, is my brother John. Say hi, John.
Hi, John.
Good. We're back to normal now. Last time I threw you a loop and I just said say hi. And you're like, you didn't know what the hell to do. You're like, so I didn't say hi.
I don't know what to say now.
And you said like goodbye. You didn't know what to do. You were totally screwed. But anyway, we're back with another Catching Up with Keith episode. If you have not heard, you're missing out, man. But we're going to catch up with our friend Keith Giles, who always has 1,000,001 things going on, and we like to catch up with him periodically and find out how many more books he's written, how many more podcasts he's launched. Who knows what else? I think he's actually getting his PhD in like astrophysics or something. And I think he's actually learning to meditate and also brew whiskey or beer. I don't know.
No. You brew whiskey?
Don't screw with my wordage. I'm just trying to say the man's busy, man. He's a busy guy. Sorry. But we're actually here to talk to him. I'm not going to give you a bio because you don't need one, and quite frankly, you don't deserve one. So I'm just, I kid.
That's the way to keep our listener level going up. It's like telling you don't deserve shit.
This is the level of discourse you can come to expect. Anyway, we're always glad to have Keith back because Keith is the bomb. We tease and we kid, but that's because Keith is the bomb. So welcome back, bud. So good to see you.
Oh, Nat and John, thank you so much. Great to be back. Thanks so much.
So there's a lot going on, but first and foremost, even though we were sort of tongue in cheek about it, you do have a new book out.
Yes.
Even though it has a poorly translated Latin title, let's talk about it.
That's right. Yes,
says the guy who speaks not a word of Latin. So
right.
Go ahead, man.
Yeah, it's called Sola Mysterium, which, as David Bentley Hart told me, is gibberish Latin. But I just said, you know what though, most of my readers don't speak Latin, and I like that title, so I'm going to stick with Sola Mysterium. Yeah, it's about celebrating the beautiful uncertainty of everything. It is the most fun I think I've written any book. I was so excited. You know, I finished this 7-part Jesus On series, and so glad that that's out there and that it exists, that I finished it and all that. But it just was like a breath of fresh air to sit down and write something totally different. And frankly, was something sort of like, now what? You know, and I felt like I had dealt with all these different specific, topics in the Jesus On series for people deconstructing and, the cross and hell and the end times and the Bible and all that. But then, having gone through my own deconstruction of all of that, it's kind of like I was at a place of sort of being like, now what,
Yeah.
So I've dealt with all these things. And so what's next? And this is my what's next book. This is kind of like, this is where I am. And I will tell you, I won't name names, but I did, as you do when you finish a book, I sent it out to a few people to kind of get some feedback, maybe some endorsement quotes from some people, sort of my the usual suspects. And I had someone come back to me and say, not only could they not endorse the book, but they recommended I not publish the book. They said, don't do it. Yeah. And we ended up having then like an hour-long Zoom conversation. And so, that was kind of like, okay, well, I understand where the guy was coming from. But at the end of the day, I was sort of like, well, you know what? I can't change anything that's what's in this book. It's just where I am. It's the truth. So I have to just stand behind it.
Yeah, obviously I don't want to know. Okay, I want to know, but I won't press you. I won't press you on who it was, but what was the chief complaint, or what was the reason for advising not to publish it?
Right. So I think the person's major concerns, from my memory anyway, it seemed like one of the concerns was near the beginning of the book, I say something about how if Christ is in everyone, then all of us are the incarnation of Christ. And he felt like that was too far to say that. And he said, you can say you're the body of Christ. but you can't say you're the incarnation of Christ. Like, well, that's semantics. Yeah, I mean, to me, they're the same thing. But he didn't like that. And then, whatever. But then the other part I think was really, real issue was when I start talking about how Jesus is not the only source of truth. You know what I mean? That we can discern the voice of God and the Spirit of Christ in people like Rumi and Black Elk and Socrates and Buddha and a variety of sources. That was like, no, wasn't comfortable with that. Didn't want me to, because I think the reason why, you know, for some people, even if they're deconstructed, they might feel as if there's something about the way people perceive them or they perceive themselves. Like the people that I know will not go with me and agree with me on this book are people who feel that they still need to sort of be a guardian of Christianity and defend Christianity or defend the Bible as some sort of special, unique revelation or something like that. And I understand why some people might feel the need to do that, for whatever, you know, their identity is wrapped up into that or whatever. But I'm not, you know what I mean? I don't pastor a church. I don't have a congregation of people behind me. I'm not tied to any certain denomination or statement of faith. I'm totally free to just honestly say, this is where I'm at. This is what I think. This is where my deconstruction and reconstruction process has taken me. And now I do know, and I have gotten some feedback even from some readers. I knew this was going to happen. You know, some of my readers are going to not go with me either. You know what I mean? They're like, hey, Keith, I love Untangled. I love Unbound. I love where you're at. But this book is too far for them. You know what I mean? Mm. And if so, I understand that.
I mean, it's bound to happen as you push the envelope. Yeah. You know, people are going to go as far as they're going to go with you, which is fine. But, right. I mean, I think Richard Rohr would agree with you, that first statement you said.
Yes.
And I think he falls I don't think he falls very far outside the mainstream. It's just because people haven't heard it articulated that way. You know what I mean? It's like I'm in the middle of Facebook wars today with people who simply because I posit something in a way that they've never heard it before, I'm making things up. And I'm like, you know what? Your insistence upon, you know, your level of certainty is actually kind of triggering these days. I just about discount those kinds of people out of hand anymore because they're impossible to have a conversation with.
Right.
They're impossible to have a dialogue with. I mean, you can talk, but they don't listen. And so this whole idea of certainty for me, I don't know, I'm over it. You know what I mean? And if that means that I can tap into other sources of truth, mm-hmm. I think one way you could say that's palatable to still professing Christians is to say that all truth is God's truth, right? And I think that's a palatable way of saying that, well, I guess if the Buddha said something true, he stumbled upon something that was Christ's truth. And so you at once you affirm and you also simultaneously delegitimize whatever inherent or internal truth. But yeah, I get that, man. You know as well as anybody else that you can take people so far. But if you don't lose some along the way, then you're not pushing hard enough, I guess, right?
Yeah, I guess.
To those two complaints or issues, I've done a lot of reading in the last few years, so I can't give you a name exactly, but I feel like if someone in the Desert Fathers, if I could speak also, or the first century, or within the first century theologians, or whatever you want to call them, said something to the extent of what you say first, that we are incarnated. So this isn't new.
No,
this isn't, but to our argument about specifically the Western Evangelical Church, right? They are all staunch in this idea that their version of Christianity is the original version of Christianity. Uh-huh. And they aren't willing to take the time to go back and read anything pre-Reformation, or probably even closer than that.
Yeah.
So, and then to your second one, I feel like Paul even said things to the extent that you're going to get truths from other places. He
quotes pagan sources and acknowledges that they have tapped into the same truth. You know,
so both of your issues are actually, you have biblical backing for both of these.
I totally do.
So yeah, when Paul says in him we live and move and have our being, he takes that from a poem, which was a hymn to Zeus by Epimenides or somebody. I mean, I've preached on this before because I'm like, listen, you guys got to get over this stuff.
That's right.
Then you don't have to go very back far either to their patriarch C.S. Lewis, who has basically said that sometimes a Buddhist is closer to Christianity than the Christian sitting next to you in the pew, because they have reached some kind of truth that the Christian sitting next to you has not.
Yes.
So this person that they all quote on the regular, has also said this.
So it's funny because like you brought up Richard Rohr. So it's funny because when I was on the Zoom call with this guy, and he was, urging me not to publish the book and that it was kind of out there or whatever, he said, "You sound like Richard Rohr." And I said, "Thank you."
Yeah, thank you.
And he said, "No, that's not a compliment." He goes, "I really hate Richard Rohr." And I was like, "Well, there's your problem right there." I go, "That's your problem right there." Because I feel like Richard Rohr is probably closer to, where I am right now. And I really appreciate where he's coming from. And here's what I also find fascinating, because you mentioned, John, like the Desert Fathers and, early, like it's so funny. It's exactly what you said. So when you read the mystics, you know what I mean? You read those early church fathers, the Desert Fathers and the Desert Mothers. When you read St. Teresa of Avila or, Julian of Norwich or these people, the mystics really get it. And I think they have this almost the exact same revelation of what I'm talking about. Everything we're just saying, and the same things you hear Paul say and things like that. And it's so funny to me that some people will hold up those and quote from those people and say, "Oh, there's such great truth and wisdom here," but they'll stop short of going as far as those mystics did. Now, at the same time, though, some of those mystics had to do a bit of a dance. You know what I mean? Like, they couldn't always say exactly what they believed or felt because they knew they were under scrutiny and they didn't want to be called a heretic or something like that. So sometimes they have to walk it back a little bit. Like they'd have this big ecstatic revelation of the oneness of God in all things, or Christ is in everyone and everything. But then they'd have to pull it back a tiny bit. You have a little caveat, a little asterisk, just to play it safe. And I think that's the difference is I don't have an asterisk. I'm not playing it safe. I'm just saying, no, this is exactly
and in their case, the stakes were often literally very high.
Yeah, no one's trying to kill me that I know of.
Yeah, they were, it was interesting though, because, one of the things that led me into my deconstruction in the first place was this epiphany, that as a 40-year-old pastor, I don't think I'd ever read in the church fathers.
Right.
Because in the evangelical world, they either don't exist or they exist in sound bites.
Right. So you're encouraged to read theology.
Right. But you weren't encouraged to go.
Right. You read Augustine and Aquinas, but you won't read, or Calvin or Luther, but you don't read St. Julian of Norwich or St. Teresa of Avila or St. Francis.
Right. And you certainly don't read Origen, and you certainly don't read.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
Gregory of Nyssa. You certainly don't read, and then so
Athanasius.
So I'm talking to these guys back and forth. I have done what I swore I wouldn't do, and I've sort of dipped my toe back into some public discourse about some of this stuff, and I'm reminding myself why I stopped. Because Christians are shitty sometimes. Man, they're mean.
Yes.
This guy who I know, and this is not a guy that's just like some keyboard warrior. This is a guy who has come to my coffee shop, played music in my shop, has been friendly towards me. And, and he's shooting me back these messages that are just so arrogant. They're just so condescending and telling me, admonishing me to study more, that I need to read more, that these so-called church fathers, they're not trustworthy as far as, these are the guys who actually established the church.
I know. This is so funny.
Are the people who put together the canon of scripture that you so love. And you don't take any of their words as authoritative. It's just crazy. So for them, and for most, in my experience, for most evangelicals, the world of their faith begins and ends in the Reformation.
Yes.
Whatever happened before then, they got it right finally in the Reformation.
Historic Christianity was 500 years ago.
Exactly. Martin Luther, and they couldn't even name, most of them couldn't even name beyond Luther. They couldn't name Calvin or Zwingli or some of the other ones that were involved in this. And they don't know how absolutely batshit crazy Luther got towards the end.
Oh, yes.
So there's a lot of baggage there with guys. So when you do talk, let's talk about the title of the book, because I know you're playing off of Luther's solas.
Yeah.
And when I was a young firebrand evangelical, I was a sola whore. I loved it. Sola scriptura, right? I was going to get that shit tattooed on me. I'm like, sola, You know?
Yeah.
I don't even know the rest. I know.
Are you a sola slut?
I'm a sola soldier. I got soul, but I'm not a soldier.
The soldier. I got soul.
I love that song.
The Killers. Yeah, the Killers.
So, but let's talk before we dive into Sola Mysterium, because what in your view? Because I personally believe that the sola, the 5 solas, I guess there are 5 of them.
There's 5.
Have done, especially Sola Scriptura.
Yes,
have done untold damage. And I understand Martin Luther's was largely a reaction, or probably an overreaction to some stuff. And I feel like deconstruction a lot of times begins as an overreaction, an overcorrection to something.
Yeah.
Where does that take us when we start from a premise of, if it's not in the Bible, it's not true?
Well, you're right. I mean, so that is exactly what I'm doing. And in a way, it is definitely an intentional play on, Luther. He's the father of the Protestant Reformation, and, he's reacting against overstep and overreach from papal authority. And so that's why, in his context, it was revolutionary and necessary and important to say, no, it's about the scriptures, or sola scriptura, sola fide, faith alone, all those kind of things.
Right.
So
by grace alone,
faith alone, yes, and all that stuff. Sola Christus, right, Christ alone, etc. So, and so now fast forward, 500 years, and we are in a different context, where, as you said, that sola scriptura now has become just as toxic and screwed up and dangerous to people as papal overreach and over authority was. And so I feel like this book, Sola Mysterium, is an attempt to react to that and say, what we are missing is this embracing of mystery. To recognize that it's not about having all the answers. It's not about having the right information about God. That if we're talking about God, and this is right at the beginning of the book, this is like the whole, the introduction, the forward, the premise of the book, is that if we're talking about God, we're talking about a being beyond human comprehension. And therefore, if you're going to have a conversation about this being, that's what theology is, then you're talking about a being and a topic that you cannot have certainty about. You can't. And so just to be honest, to be humble, just to admit that we are dealing with a God that transcends our comprehension, that transcends our ability to understand fully, completely, and so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to pull us back to the importance of the thing we've been missing, which is this, to embrace mystery. And so, hopefully, that, and using that as a starting point, I want to help people who are going through their deconstruction process. And by the way, I do this in the Square One group that I started like 3 years ago. People that go through that course in that community, like right at the beginning, the first thing I tell them is, hey, look, in all of your deconstructing of all your theology, I strongly suggest that you deconstruct your need to be right. And that is so that you can, once you can really learn to let go of your need to be right about everything when it comes to God and theology, that's when you can start embracing the mystery. That's when you can hold loosely to the things you think you believe, but the things you believe, not things you know, right? You have to start using language like, I think, I believe, or I hope, but not I know. You can't know. You're talking about faith. Opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty, right?
Absolutely.
And so you have to learn how to, and to me, and just personally for me, the way to stay in this place of embracing mystery is to be comfortable with not having all the answers. And then it's not having to prove that I'm right or someone else is wrong. And I think if we can learn how to do that, that's really where I feel like now we're talking about God. Now we're talking about this being that transcends, it's beyond human comprehension.
Yeah, I mean, it's years ago I read Pete Enns' book, The Sin of Certainty.
Yes.
And that might be the first place. And I do this a lot. I bet you probably do too. I read a book like that, and in there he'll quote or he'll cite other. And I'm like, oh well, I got to read this.
Gotta go chase that one.
I'm like, Pete Enns always makes my reading list go like, okay, well, there's 20 more. Read somebody else in there. Anyway, so that's what turned me on to some of the more contemplative type of guys. And within that stream of contemplative Christianity, there is an underlying assumption that you can't know, that you can, I think you can have some reasonable amount of confidence in some things. And so for myself, as I've deconstructed, and I'm still, I'm still deconstructing, but I have noticed that what I have most days is a confidence, and I do have a confidence about a couple things. Now I would say categorically, that God is love, and that everything else I know about God has to fit inside that construct. And if it doesn't, then it's got to go. That sounds like certainty to me, but it's a very loosely held certainty. It's not dogmatic. It's no more doctrinal than I believe that, it was Peter Rollins the first time I heard him say that God isn't love, that God isn't loving. He is love incarnate. Everywhere that love exists is the existence of God. So for him and for others like him, God doesn't even exist. God himself is existence. And so he would push back on any of our attempts to objectify God at all and say, well, God is not something separate at all. He is the very bedrock of existence. And so I like that, but that brings a whole, just brings a whole level of uncertainty, but in a good way. Does it make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think, but I would agree with you that a foundational, I guess you can, like what you want to call it, truth, the foundational assumption is that God is love. And that's definitely mine as well. That's something I hold tightly to. But I'm not comfortable saying that I'm certain about it, because not on the level of like I could prove it to anybody.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
So for me, it's more of like just saying, I think it's an exclusive alternative. You either have to start with the premise that God is love. And then if you do, then a whole bunch of other things will follow from that. Yeah. But if you make another assumption, and your assumption is that God is holy, or God is justice, or God is wrath, or whatever, well, then that's a totally different assumption and starting point. And then everything is going to flow out of that. Right. And so for me, I would definitely say, I don't know if I could say I'm certain that God is love, but I would just say this, that if God isn't love, then that's not a God I'm interested in having any connection to.
Amen.
Well, and then there's this idea that we try to put our label. We try to put our label on what love is or what that means, right?
Right. We define.
I did a video on this on that that TikTok platform,
on the TikTok,
on the clock platform, and so. I was basically we have to remove this human construct of love from God in the sense that we are trying to figure out how God loves.
Yeah.
Like God is a loving what? No, God isn't a loving anything. God is love.
Love, right.
And when then you take that and you take some of these statements that you're making that we are Christ incarnate. So that means that we are love. Yeah,
made in the image of God. If God is love, we're made in that image.
So when we break down this human construct of love to the point where we say, okay, we have to move past this ability to be loving and just to be love.
Right.
And then you start breaking down all of this crap, all this shit that's put in front of us that says that we can only love certain people, we can only be accepting of certain people, and that's not being love. No. That is choosing to love.
Yes, and if love, and I've done this. I've had fun posting on Facebook once in a while or Twitter. Like, hey, you know what's great about conditional love? Nothing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not a damn thing. And once it's conditional, and I've talk about having arguments with people. It's not love, right? Yeah, I've definitely had arguments with Christians on social media around that conversation, and they'll either say that God's love isn't. At least they're being logically consistent. They'll admit that in their view, that God's love isn't unconditional. They'll just say, no, that's not true. God's love is not unconditional. Like, all right, well, geez, that sucks.
Yeah.
But at least, again, they're being logically consistent. But the frustrating thing is when you're trying to talk to people who want to say, they want it both ways. No, God is unconditional love. As long as you believe, or as long as you, do X, Y, Z. It's like, well, no, you're right there. It's not unconditional. You just made it conditional. But I wanted to read a quote. This is a really awesome quote. And I think for anyone listening, especially Christians, hopefully this will be helpful for you. This is from the book. And this is a quote from someone. Well, I'm not going to tell you who it's from first. I'm just going to read the quote. And so in the book, I quote this person, and he says, "If anyone thinks he knows something, he is not yet known as he ought to know." And that quote is from this guy named the Apostle Paul in a letter he wrote called 1 Corinthians 8:12, or 8:2. And so it's sounding like, and we were having a conversation before we hit record. And John, if you want to elaborate on this, I think it's something worth talking about. But you were talking about like why in this book, like I use some churchianity language, you know what I mean? And I actually had another person tell me that they really liked the book, but that it had way too many scripture references for them. And, but the reason why is because not that I need them, because I don't. I've moved on. Like I'm totally exhausted with like all these debates with like trying to treat the Bible as if it's some kind of a history book or a documentary or something, you know. And I don't need that. But I know I do have a lot of readers. I have a lot of people that have been reading my stuff, and they get really nervous when I talk about stuff like this. You know, when I say that we're the incarnation of Christ in the world, or that, you know, everything is connected, or God's love is unconditional, or that we have to embrace mystery and we really don't know anything, you know, because when I say some of those things, they get really nervous, right? Their alarm bells start going off. And so for them, I will say, oh, by the way, I know that sounds scary to you, but there's like 5 verses from the New Testament that affirm what I just said that's making you nervous. And it's more to like calm them down and make them go, oh, okay, wow, I guess that's not as scary as I thought it was. You know, I would love to get to the point, maybe one day, maybe after a couple of books down the road, as I continue to go out into left field, you know, I would love to be able to write a book one day where I don't have to quote any scripture verses at all, that I could just say whatever I wanted to say, you know, and that'll be a wonderful day. But right now, I don't feel that I can, because I still feel like I'm trying to bring some people along with me. That if I just said that stuff, I mean, right now, like that quote I just read, if I didn't tell some people that was Paul the Apostle, and I just read that, people would be like, oh, that sounds heretical. That's some New Age guy. That's some, you know, out there thing. No, it's the freaking New Testament. But until you tell them that, they don't relax, and they don't feel safe to receive it, you know?
Yeah. And then on the inverse of that, you could, and I think you quoted him. I'm not sure if you did it this way on purpose, but you could quote Buddha, and again, not put Buddha's name on it, and they're going to think it's Christ.
That's exactly right.
Right?
That's exactly right.
So if you were to leave the Buddha off of some of the quotes, the Buddha, or there's stuff within the Hindu faith, or there's stuff within Taoism, there's stuff, I mean, all over, right? There's stuff within Black Elk Speaks,
I love that.
Which a local friend of mine who is, he's Nez Pierce, he's the one that turned me on to Black Elk Speaks. And so I read that book about 6 months ago, and that guy is Christ-centered. He's absolutely Christ-centered, but without ever once speaking a name of Christ.
Right.
So there's this idea, right, where we could throw all these quotes out without putting a name on it. And they're going to go, oh, look at this. This is so biblical. This is so good. This is, or the inverse, right? Which is what you're showing. Oh, this is heretical, but you're like, yeah, but it's in your Bible.
Right.
So it's, and to the point where you were talking about, what we talked about before we hit record was, some of my issue, with your book. And I don't even think I have an issue. I honestly believe this is the best book you've written. And I wrote that in my review. I truly believe that. That's not me just like putting up bullshit to, just to praise where it's not needed. I love this book. This is your best book.
Thank you.
And then I told you after that, but I disagree with more in this book than I've ever disagreed with anything that you've written, which is awesome. It's just a weird thing. And what I meant by that was I disagree with some of the language you use because it felt super churchy to me.
Yeah.
Which was kind of weird because I know that you're really not connected with a church right now. That's not really your deal.
Right.
So, and I said, I kind of get the feeling maybe you did this on purpose.
Yes.
And then, so you've already explained some of that, but is that all of what you were talking about? Or is there more to this idea of kind of using this Christianese or churchese? Was there a point more to than just pulling these people along with you? Or was that pretty much it?
No, I think that is it. I think so. I think what you're picking up on when you read that language, and this is the fine line, this is like this tightrope of trying to walk. Because on the one hand, I want to, I do want to, if I can, bring some people along with me who maybe like myself, kind of started out in this Christian bubble and are now slowly deconstructing their way out of it. And so, and I guess for the most part, I feel like that is probably my largest audience, at least the one that I've built to this point, right? That's who most of them are. But at the same time, I do feel like this book is an opportunity to start speaking to some people that don't come out of that world. And so I was actually really encouraged because, I sent this book to a friend of mine. She is not a Christian, has never been a Christian ever. Was raised Buddhist. She's Vietnamese, but she's a friend. And I just figured, what the heck? I'll see what she thinks about it. And she loved it. She was like, "Oh my gosh, Keith, like there's stuff in here you're saying that I've been saying for the longest time." What she resonated with more was that part of the book, like you're talking about, where I'm pointing out the same truth that's spoken out of the mouth of Buddha and Black Elk and Socrates and Rumi and the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Thomas and all these, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And like, oh my gosh, it's all these random sources. But when you put them all side by side and you start reading, like they're saying the same thing. It's so beautiful. And so I was really, really excited that she appreciated that. And also, and I've noticed with this book, this is my first book ever. And of course, it's not surprising. There's no cross on the cover of the book. It doesn't say Jesus anywhere or Christianity anywhere on the book, right? And so because of that, because of the topics that I'm covering, and because it doesn't look anyway like sort of a typical Christian book, this is the first book I've ever written that has been number one in a new release category on Amazon that's not a Christian category. It sat at number one for at least a week under just the mysticism category, not Christian mysticism. That's a different category, but just full on, plain old, ordinary, everyday mysticism. And when I saw it was number one in mysticism, I was like, oh my gosh. And so when you click on it, it'll show you the full, all the books that are in that top 100 new release category. And so my book's number one. And then the next one is like a book on angels, like some from New Age thing. And the third was some book on some tantric thing, and like, I was so excited. Like, this is awesome. I love that my book is leading a category that includes this wide range of so many other books and titles and topics. And I know the more I continue to write in this direction, I'm probably going to move farther and farther away from feeling that I need to sort of protect some of my readers, or hold their hand a little bit, like it's okay, it's safe. You know what I mean? More and more, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say, here's what I wanted to say. And I don't feel the need that I need to have like 5 Bible verses to back it up.
And that might be why it affected me that way, is because, I'm kind of beyond that point too, right? I don't need that anymore. Yeah. That's not really what I need to convince me that what you're saying speaks truth.
Right. Exactly.
So maybe that's, like, I don't want to say it was triggering because that's the wrong word, but, but I think I was like, well, I don't need this. I'm, because I'm reading things like Black Elk Speaks. I'm reading, I'm reading I'm reading stuff that's connected to like Thich Nhat Hanh and
I love him. Living Christ, great book.
Yeah, I've read almost everything I can find by Thich Nhat Hanh. So I'm at that point where I don't need Bible verses to tell me that there's truth.
I don't either, right?
Right.
So it's just like trying to feel like, oh man, how do I?
But I totally get it, right? I totally get it because I'm not that far removed from preaching sermons where I was like, okay, where are the Bible verses that back up what I'm saying? I need to go find them. Nat can agree and Nat can understand this not from specifically the church he's in right now, the church he came from, where you better have those verses, right? That will back up, specifically if it even sounds remotely heretical.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
It was weird though, because even in my former church, when I was just a staff pastor who preached sometimes, I preached stuff that was out of the Bible, and they still were like, I don't know if you can say that. I'm like, it's in the fucking Bible.
I know. I love
that. Can I? Right. So we were doing this thing on talking about Jesus. Our concept of him as being fully human. Yeah. Which is, okay, let's talk about that. So Jesus experiencing the full range of human emotions. And
yes.
And I had the audacity to say, well, that included fear. You can't say that Jesus had fear. And even Brad Jersak, God bless his heart, pushed back on me on that one a little bit. I'm like, but what? Well, okay, so name it something else if you want to. But the scene in the Bible, in the Gospels, where he's in the Garden of Gethsemane and he's sweating because he's under blood. And drops of blood are so. And I've been in the church my whole life, and I've heard doctors have told us and scientists have said that this can happen if you're under a great deal of pressure, that the capillary is close to your surface, and this could happen. I'm like, okay, how much pressure does someone have to be under? How much stress? And isn't a source of that stress the unknown? Isn't a source of that stress? Could you not say? And so I pull in this quote by Athanasius, and I believe it was Athanasius who said, that which is not assumed cannot be healed. And so how does Jesus heal us of our fear if he never assumed that, if he never experienced it? The whole idea of Jesus entering into this human condition is that he would feel and experience the full range of human experience and emotion. And man, I just was not allowed to say it.
Yeah. And then there's so many things like that. Like, we're not allowed to talk about, there's this progression of Christology that we notice from the Gospels through the book of Acts, and then going into, like Paul's letters, his real letters. It's not the pseudo, but even the pseudo letters, which would be like Ephesians and Colossians, and then later, like 1 John and things like that. And so, like, if you look at Mark's gospel, you don't really have this language that Jesus is God. You have the language he's the Messiah, and he does some miracles, and it's like shocking. But it kind of progresses from like, okay, Jesus, he's this great rabbi, and then we think he's the Messiah. Oh, he's the Messiah. Oh, he's the Son of God. Oh no, he's God, and he pre-existed and created you know what I mean? Like, it happens over time. So not only do you have an understanding of the Christology of Jesus that starts in one place and slowly expands outward, although technically relatively quickly, within probably 20, 30 years maybe, that happens, but it happens relatively quickly. But then you also have within the writings, within the New Testament, and early church fathers did debate this, before we landed on this sort of Trinitarian theology. But, early church fathers would point out the fact that, so there were different views. You probably know this. There were different views about at what point did Jesus become the Christ. So some of them would say, well, he became Christ at the baptism, because that's when the Spirit of God comes out of heaven, or as the dove, and rests on him. And then God says, this is my son. So at that point, Jesus becomes the Christ. But there's other verses, like in the book of Acts, that talks about the fact that it's at the resurrection, that it's when God raises Jesus from the dead, that's when he becomes Christ. That's when he becomes, but he wasn't before that. He was just a guy, right? But then because of his faithfulness or whatever, then God says, oh no, I'm going to raise him up. And it's the resurrected Jesus that's the Christ. And then you have, then the Gospel of John, which has a different view, which is, oh no, he was the Word, long before this, and he was just made flesh later. But again, understand the New Testament is not of one mind about that. And that's why early church fathers weren't one mind about it. They also had different views and debated this, a couple hundred years before they finally landed on, okay, everybody, we think we got this figured out. It's this Trinity thing. All in favor, say aye. But that's not the way it happened. Right. It took time. It took a long time to work these things out. And do we
all those opposed? Line up to get your crosses.
Right. But see, we're not comfortable acknowledging, we can't admit that they didn't have all this figured out in the beginning, that they didn't really know exactly, they didn't all agree on who Jesus was and how this all worked out.
Right.
So yeah, I want to go back to the nuance phase of like, let's not be so certain that we landed on the right answer.
Yeah.
Again, I'm gonna try to do from memory some of this stuff. So Polycarp, who was a disciple of someone who was a disciple of John, right? Am I correct? So we're not that far removed at that point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
we're a couple generations.
You don't have first-hand knowledge, but you have some pretty damn close knowledge. And you're already confused as to what exactly is going on, right? So, I mean, there's disagreement within that group of people on what Christ is and how we are going to look at Christ.
Yeah.
And almost to the point where you think that this was the point. And this is kind of to my point where we were talking about where, as we move forward into the realm of the next evolution of faith or Christianity or whatever you want to call it, right? That I really feel like we're on the cusp of something that's like pretty remarkable, with things like the new telescopes that are letting us see farther out into the universe and realize that there's so much shit out here that we just don't even understand.
Yeah, but when you look through those telescopes, and to me this doesn't get emphasized enough, when you look in through that telescope and you take this picture, which is this, the farthest we've ever looked, understand you are looking back in time.
Right.
You are looking at stars and galaxies that probably some of them don't exist anymore. They may have already died out by now. And that you're looking at a photograph of when they did exist hundreds of millions of years ago, billions of years ago. And when you're looking at a photograph of these things, and when that photograph was really taken, like when those things really had just existed at that point in time that you're looking back at, Earth didn't exist.
Right.
Earth hadn't been formed yet. Like, holy crap.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing. It begs the question, like, when are we going to have our next, like, Copernicus moment, where some scientist is going to drop something and we're going to go, oh, now we have to rethink everything.
Yeah, then theology has this shift. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, either theology shifts to accommodate the new information, or it does what it normally does, which is dig in its heels, call them all heretics, try to burn them all at the stake. But, this whole notion, it's interesting to me as we talk about how the Christology evolves, right? I mean, it evolved up to the point where at the point of the Great Schism, they're still arguing about it.
Yes.
I mean, that's a major reason, if not the major reason, there is an Eastern Orthodox Church and everybody else.
Yes.
It's because they fundamentally disagreed on the nature and character of God and Christ and the Trinity. They just and that was what 300 years, 400 years. I mean, I don't remember when the Great Schism was, but this. So generations and generations and generations had come and gone as they're still fighting about. We get the famous story about St. Nicholas, punching some dude out over, which I love.
That's right.
Santa Claus, you're a badass.
Yes. I'm here to debate theology and punch heretics, and I'm all out of theology.
Right, but as I point, what's interesting too is as you follow that evolution down through the ages, right? It's interesting because if you know anyone who's Anabaptist, they'll tell you, that the same people, and I point this out in my book, that the same people who were persecuted like crazy by the Catholic Church during the Protestant Reformation, those same people who were persecuted, once they came into a place of prominence, they persecuted the hell out of the Anabaptists.
That's right. That's exactly right.
They dunked them in rivers and drowned them and called it their adult baptism.
That's right.
It was brutal. And so, it was kind of like that one group of people like, okay, well, we all hate them too, though. All right. So at least the Catholics and the Protestants could agree that those guys were, and really what they fundamentally disagreed about was baptism. I mean, son of a bitch. We're talking anyway. So the idea then, and that's what gets me. I guess that's what gets me. The arrogance of the whole thing and what Brad Jersak called this spiritual amnesia is what is alarming to me, that our memory is just so short. So we're standing here certain of this certain set of beliefs and doctrines, and in 10 or 20 years ago, everybody was fighting mad about all of it. But no. But now you have it.
Yes. And this is what I point out in the book is that this is the danger of defining your Christianity by being certain, because it is historically, we go back and look, the groups of people, the groups of Christians who ended up torturing, burning, skinning alive, crucifying upside down other Christians were the ones who were convinced that they were the most certain that they were right. It's another good reason why you should embrace mystery and admit we don't know these things. It's not
nobody who's ever said, I kind of think this, ever went to war over that.
Right, exactly.
You never went to war.
No, I really don't know.
I'm willing to fight you over it, but I'm just not sure. You might be right. I might. Yeah,
maybe I'm right. I don't know.
So maybe the sin of certainty is that it ultimately, eventually leads to violence every single time.
It can. It certainly can.
You have to. When you become that immovable object, what do you do when that conflict inevitably comes? Right. Are you so staunchly convinced of your rightness that then you have to push back? And that's the one thing I've noticed lately is if and when I push back on some of these sort of sacred cows of evangelicalism, so much of who they are, and this was me, so I feel like I can say this, so much of who people are is wrapped up in what they believe that when you attack a belief, you're attacking a person.
That's right.
They don't see the difference. Like you attacked. No, I said penal substitutionary atonement is bullshit. So you just attacked me. No, I attacked an ideology.
Right. You're right.
Led into that you feel personally attacked. That's part of the problem, right?
Yes. People get their identity from their beliefs, and that's another thing we have to get. I would encourage people to move away from. You are not your beliefs, and in my experience, and probably yours, you guys too. My beliefs have changed a lot over time. I'm still me.
Yeah.
My core identity is I am still who I am. My views, my opinions, my attitudes have changed. And yes, those views and attitudes can influence some of my behaviors because I think it's true that I might be an asshole. But my core, my core identity is not those beliefs. And so the more you can separate from that, and you can, again, once you embrace mystery, once you hold loosely, once you move away from certainty and you move into this place of being able to be comfortable saying, I think, I'm not sure, I don't know, I'm still studying, I'm still learning, or right now this is where I'm at, or I'm leaning in this direction, but you're remaining open to hearing other people, other views, other ideas, and you're willing to change your views, then your identity, you realize, my identity isn't tied to these things. I'm the person who is just receiving the information, considering it, thinking about it, accepting it or rejecting it. This is the other thing too, is that I think we're way too quick to make up our minds these days. Someone does a Google search, they go on YouTube, they watch a couple of clips. I got the answer. I know this answer. I know what I believe. And I feel, at least I've learned in my own experience, the more I'm moving in this direction, I'm much slower to make up my mind about something. I'm much more comfortable saying, I'm learning this and I'm seeing that. That's interesting, but I'm not going to so quick to pull the trigger on it's this. I know the answer.
Yeah. I have a good friend who is not where I am at. Let's just say it that way. And if he listens to this podcast, he'll know who I'm talking about. And so he at one point just says, I'm really, I'm not super comfortable with what you're saying. Can you just add this sentence or this phrase? And it's, this is where I am right now.
There you go.
And at first I was offended because I was like, no, I know now. I know that I was wrong before.
Yeah.
But what I have to admit, and where he's right in that phrase, which is this is where I am right now, is that I was someplace else and I've changed.
Yeah.
And the me of 2 years ago would look, if I was, look ahead 2 years, would probably call me a heretic, right? And that's one of the kind of litmus tests of how we're evolving and moving.
Yes.
I'd say the me of a year ago would probably call me a heretic right now.
Oh yeah.
The me of right now is calling you one. I'm just saying, you're a damn heretic.
So I mean, was it Richard Rohr who claimed or calls it something like the knowable mystery, right? So
he says something to the effect of that. To say that God's a mystery doesn't mean that he's not knowable, or that you can't understand him. It's that you can endlessly understand him.
Right.
That's right.
And so that's kind of where I'm at right now. Is like I don't expect this to this evolving version of me as I move forward towards a connection with the divine or God or whatever, the spirit or the universe or whatever the hell you want to call it. It's always going to change. It's always there's going to be opening moments where I'm like, oh, I never saw that. And I think we talked a little bit about this before we start recording too. It's like, I really believe that that's what we are called to do. Mm-hmm. That if there is a God and if he has set this in some kind of motion, that he has, there I go with the he's, they have, she has invited us into this mystery.
Right.
And soon as you let go of certainty and you deep dive into uncertainty is where you really start learning, and you'll realize that you're never going to stop.
Right. Right. And then that's to me is a critical shift too, like to your quote about, this endlessly knowing of God. To me, it's also helpful to shift the way I define knowing God. Again, it's not knowing all the right information about God, having all the right answers. I think that's impossible. And if you think you've got that, it's an illusion. You really don't. You don't know those things. But to shift knowing away from that and to talk about knowing God in the sense of the way Jesus uses the word gnosko, right? I talk about this in the book, in the Gospel of John, when he says he says eternal life is this, to know God and his Son whom he has sent. But the word he uses for know, he could have used episteme. And if he used episteme in the Greek, that's the word for knowledge, information. But he doesn't. He uses this word gnosko, which is a scandalous word that you would use the way a husband on his wedding night knows his wife and has this intimacy with her as she conceives a new life within her. And so if we can shift when we think about knowing God more in this intimacy, in this opening up of ourselves completely and fully to God in this beautiful, vulnerable way in love, because again, God is love. So how do we relate to God? Well, it's through this love. Then if we talk about knowing God in that way, it is not information. It's not being right or wrong. It is more of this experiential thing. So it means that we're less capable. I say this again in the book. We are less capable if we move in this direction of shifting knowing to this way of knowing God, that we become less capable of explaining and defining God, but we become way more capable of experiencing God. And that, to me, I think that's what it's always been about. Again, we're going back to Jesus, going to Paul, going to the church fathers, going to the mystics from across religious traditions. They all have this in common, that it's this knowing of God that transcends information and becomes more about this mystical experience of God, which is endless, right?
Yeah. Well, then, because
deeper.
Yeah. Even putting it in religious terms, when we put the onus on us to know the right things and believe the right things about God, then who's saving who? Right?
Right.
To whatever degree, we understand what salvation is or isn't. I still have a concept of whatever that means. It's not me that does it. It's God doing it for me. So if the goal is that I know all the right things about God, well, then it's on me. And the other thing that this mysterium, I was just going to use the Latin, this mysterium, which now makes me think of like a movie with Dustin Hoffman. Wasn't there something like something about a magisterium and
I don't know.
Something about an emporium, John. Come on, help me out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
It's a total non sequitur. Don't follow him in the rabbit trail. That was utter bullshit. Because I was also going to say that God's like an onion. He's got layers. You can peel him, but that's different. But it does allow us to hold things in tension, right?
Yes.
And that's the one thing that I have found, that amongst my real fundamentalist friends who have a disturbing need for certainty, there is no ability whatsoever to hold anything in tension. It all has to be resolved.
Right. That's right.
And so there's all of this stuff that if they're honest, and I think it scares them to be honest, Because to be honest means you look at scripture objectively and say, yeah, there's a lot of tension in there.
Yes.
There's, the Bible is multivocal. It does not come with one voice to say the same thing over and over again. It actually contradicts itself a lot.
Yes, it does.
Which points to me, it points more to the beauty of it than anything else. That it is a human construct. Whether or not it's in concert with God is debatable. But anyway, it allows us to hold things in tension, and that allows us to be humble and approach people with whom we disagree and say, okay, I don't see it that way. But that's okay. I mean, I can still respect you and love you and treat you kindly and not call you an asshole on Facebook.
Well, the other issue is that when you aren't comfortable with tension, you need resolution. You have to come to grips with the realization that way too much stuff in this life does not resolve.
That's right.
No.
Specifically, not the way that you think it should.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, how many friends do we know who have prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed for a specific result, and they didn't get it?
That's right.
And so then someone in their core group says, "Well, you didn't have enough faith," or something like that.
Maybe the answer was no, John. Maybe the answer,
or yeah.
The answer was no.
But they have to live in that world because they need it to be certain. So they have to give it a certainty. Where there is no certainty, their certainty is, well, you lack faith, you lacked a connection with God. So they create a certainty out of uncertainty so they can move forward.
Right.
Whereas we're like, no, there's just no one. There's just too many questions in this universe.
That's right.
And sometimes we're not going to get an answer.
Yeah.
And we have to be okay with that.
That's right. No, I think that you put your finger on something there too. I mean, that's one of those questions. Like anytime I have ever tried to have a conversation with anybody and try to figure out that whole thing about suffering and why does God allow this and why did this horrible thing happen and why about, that whole question of why, and trying to make sense of all that. Like, and I like what Thomas Ord, has come up with, and Mark Karras, they have this idea that God can't and all that kind of stuff. And you know what? I find it on the philosophical level, I like it better as far as a theory of trying to make sense of the answering that question, when it comes to suffering and things, why do bad things happen to good people and all that. I think as far as all the theories that are out there go, I prefer that theory. But if I'm honest, I want to be honest, it doesn't answer all the questions. There's still mystery there. I still come to a place of saying, but you know what? I still don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. I don't think we ever will know that. So now you're bumping up against this mystery. And I think people will live their lives, their Christian lives, if you're raised in the Christian church and you are taught to believe that it's all about having the right answers and it is the right information and you have to have certainty. And that's what faith is. It's not having a doubt and being totally certain. And that'll work for you until it doesn't. Until you reach this point where suddenly, oops, it didn't work. And wait, it did. I don't have certainty. And hold on a minute. And then now you're going to bump up against that mystery. Yeah. And that's why I think it's good.
I agree. That's a story I've heard repeated over and over again from people who, as they transition from whatever level of certainty they have, and as they begin to maybe deconstruct, not for everybody, but for a lot of folks, it's a crisis point where, there was this set of beliefs that were supposed to work. Mm-hmm. And then those beliefs didn't work anymore. Now, if I hadn't already been deconstructing and I was hardcore when my daughter got really sick, that would have been my crisis point. Because all the stuff I was taught to believe didn't work. And, but I went in knowing I don't think this is going to work. So, I was already kind of like, that was actually a whole different set of tension for me. We're like, I don't know how to pray. I don't know. Cause I talked about that with Mark Karras and Thomas Ord both. I'm like, okay, I got to a point where I don't know how to pray. I don't know even why I pray, and there is a certain fatalism to taking some of that open relational theology to its logical extremes that says, well, then why bother?
Yes.
And so Mark does a good job, I think, of pulling that back a little bit on his whole concept of participatory prayer.
Yes, I like that. Conspiring prayer.
Thank you. Conspiring prayer, where but where it is participatory, where it is, hey, listen, we're partnering with God. We're not just saying, God, why don't you feed the hungry? We're going,
how can we do that?
Yeah. Like God's going, I don't know. I was going to ask you the same thing.
Right. How are you? I don't know. How are we?
I don't know. How are we? Why don't you get off your ass and go feed somebody? Don't, go be Paul Bergman and take a sack of groceries to a homeless camp. Don't be an asshole.
Yeah.
Well, but on the other end of this,
right, Paul, I mentioned you, Paul. So now you got to come back on the show, Paul, and get us in. No, anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
On the other end of this, and I think we all three, I know for sure Keith has stories like this. I know I do, and I'm pretty sure Nat does. We all have stories that we can't explain. Right? Of mystical, crazy ass moments in our life that have no explanation other than, we want to use the phrases like divine intervention. And, it's a Christianese phrase, and I don't know if I like it. But I have those moments. There are those moments within my life where I'm like, I can't give you an answer. I don't know what happened there. And so the mystery is it the mystery of me searching for an answer, or is it the mystery of just accepting that sometimes weird shit happens?
That's right.
And I don't need to explain it to anybody because it's really nobody else's business but mine.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard your story, Keith, about being, on the verge of, you weren't on the verge. You had no money. You're getting food from like a food pantry, and this food and this money shows up, right?
Yep.
Without any explanation. I mean, I think you know who it came from. I think I'm not sure.
Yeah. No, I know. I know. But they didn't know the specifics of what we needed, and what they brought was specifically what we needed.
Right.
That's because you tried, Keith. Come on.
Yeah.
So there are those mysteries, and that's what keeps me coming back, I guess. That's what keeps me coming back to the moments like there's too much weird shit. There's just too many weird moments of with no explanation how the right thing at the right moment at the right time caused me to not have to worry about that bill, or worry about getting my car fixed, or worrying about how, and I don't know what fixed it.
Right.
And I'm not sure it's important to know. I think maybe it's more important to accept whatever that was at that moment and move on.
Yes.
And then be the same to other people, right? Be the light to other people.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a weird place to be, right? Because on one part of me is like, prayer doesn't work. Asking God to fix things doesn't work. And then these crazy ass moments happen.
Right. Exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And again, that's part of that mystery too, of like, I can't explain it. And it's not a formula either, like I've had those amazing, miraculous things that happen, and I can't explain them other than, wow, that was awesome. Thanks. I think God did something here that was beautiful, but I didn't. There's nothing I could say like I made that happen and I couldn't do it again. It's not a formula.
I can point it multiple times where I'm like, professing to God that you have told me that if I believe that you can do all things and I can do all things through you, and I am proclaiming that this get fixed. And it doesn't.
That's right. Exactly. No, I prayed for a lot of friends of mine. I've seen healings. I've experienced healings. I share some of these in the book. But at the same time, I prayed for people that I dearly loved, and they died of cancer. They didn't make it. It didn't work out. So, and again, I don't think here's the thing. The good news should be we're not supposed to. We don't have to know the answer. So it's like God isn't saying, well, figure it out. You need to know the answer. No, we don't have to know the answer. We want to sometimes, and we sometimes feel like the validity of my faith is whether or not I can answer those questions, but you really don't have to answer those questions. I think the only thing we're really asked to do is on some level to trust. And again, maybe that pulls back to what we were saying earlier, that God is love. I may not know anything else. I may not be certain of anything else. I may not have any other thing I can hold on to. The thing I feel like I hold on to is that God is good. God is love. And I'm going to hold on to that,
I think we are all in our 50s, and I wish I had learned some of this sooner, right? Which is one of the things that I've learned, and just recently was maybe it's just to be present, right? As I had a friend recently die of cancer, and the old me would have pulled away and just not been present. And I made myself be present to be part of this part of his journey, to sit with him and stand with him and not preach, he was terminal. There was no turning around of this. And to just be there, I think I gained more than he did, obviously. And saw the light through his eyes as he's like, just so happy that people are coming to see him. And just so grateful that he had, I don't think there was a day in the end of his life where there wasn't somebody there with him, be it friends or family and I think that's what we're being asked to do. We're not going to miraculously heal these people, but can we make their transition into the next plane, whatever that's going to be? Can we make that transition more peaceful, more loving, more safe?
Right. And it's going back to what we said a minute ago too, of like being love, right? Can we be love in that moment to that person? And I don't think we're asked much more than that, right? Jesus made it so simple. Love God and love others. I mean, we have complicated it. And that's the other problem with all of this doctrine and theology and arguing and debating, all this, who's right, who's wrong. No, we don't know. Who cares who's right or wrong? It doesn't, if you can have the right theology, but if you don't know how to be love to other people in those kinds of moments, then your theology is worthless. You know?
Just a clanging gong or whatever.
Yes.
Something about a symbol.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I love it, man. That feels like a good place to wrap up. Sola Mysterium, the poorly Latin translated title of Keith's new book. I'm just going to let that go because you got beat up by David Bentley Hart. And if you're going to get beat up by somebody,
I put it in the book. I put it in the book. I thought it was so hilarious.
If you're going to get beat up by somebody, man, at least it was by someone classy.
That's right.
But that you got a David Bentley Hart endorsement is huge. That's a big deal. The book is awesome. You're awesome. You guys should buy this book. If you have a local bookstore, we keep saying this over and over again, please patronize your local bookstores. If you live in Texas like me and Keith and a little bit of a book wasteland where I live. So you may have to use that other evil empire to order your book. But that's fine because it pushes it up the bestseller list on Amazon. So we don't hate that either. So. And while you're at it, pick up every other copy of his book and pick up a bunch of Quoir books while you're at it. They're usually on sale on Kindle at a pretty decent price.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think Quoir is doing the best value around for, high quality theology at bargain basement prices. That could be a marketing campaign. Come on down to Quoir. We got high quality theology, bargain basement prices. We're crazy. Crazy Keith. Come on down.
Yeah. Come on
down. We're going to have one of those random weird commercials now.
Let's make a commercial, Keith. Come on down.
Come on down.
As always, a pleasure, a joy. Always a lot of fun talking to you, man. I'm sure we'll chat again. And all the best with next time we talk, we'll have other big announcements to make that we can't make. We'll tease you. We can't make those announcements yet, but they're coming.
There might be a couple of big announcements coming up. Yes.
Might be a couple. I know there's at least 2 or 3
that's right.
And we can't quite bring up yet. There's so many. There might be 7 separate surprises.
Perhaps. Yes.
And if you order right now, you get a set of steak knives.
That's right.
Don't forget that.
Are they Ginsu?
Of course. Right through it.
Right through an aluminum can, which is something most knives should probably do.
Right. Exactly.
All right, John. Put me out of my misery, man. Get it done.
I'm hitting the stop. Here we go.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.